Welcome to episode 6 of Breaking the Ice. We're your hosts, Elliott Simpson, Ayoe Kristiansen, and Dr. Jessica Shadian. This week, we're holding a discussion on diplomacy in the Arctic between Canada and Greenland. Today, melting ice and potential new maritime routes are bringing heightened attention and players to the Arctic region on the whole, and renewed cooperation within the North American Arctic. Given the fact that Greenland and Canada are a mere 450 kilometers from one another and share an abundance in natural, especially mineral resources, there is much potential to strengthen business and other ties between the two countries. This Arctic 360 discussion will set out to learn more about where we are, where we hope to go, and the opportunities to come for cooperation within the North American Arctic between Canada and Greenland. Today, we are joined by Simeon McKay, Counsellor for Political and Public Affairs at the Embassy of Canada to the Kingdom of Denmark, and Inuuteq Holm Olsen, Minister Plenipotentiary and Head of Greenland's representation at the Danish Embassy in Washington, D.C. We hope you enjoy the discussion.
So welcome, everyone. We're quite excited to have you both here for this conversation. This is the second year that we're having our podcast series of Breaking the Ice, and we do it every summer. We have summer internship program, and so this year we're very excited to have Elliott Simpson from the Monk School, and this year for the first time we have Ayoe Kristiansen from Greenland. And for this summer we have two streams. We have one on innovation in the Arctic, and the other is on Canadian Greenlandic relations and how to strengthen those. And this is a bit of a pilot because we've in the past always done podcasts, and so now we're going to start doing a few of them webinar style and possibly live and going into the future. So I thank you both in a way for being guinea pigs. So and we really look forward to this. And I just want to bring up one article that Ayoe actually pointed out to me that was published just maybe this past week from two of the main political scientists in Greenland, and I think it sets a really nice tone for our conversation today. But it was a discussion on surveys that had been done with Greenlanders at wide in the Greenlandic population, and again and again it was reiterated that among Greenlanders' preferred countries that they would like to have stronger ties to and strengthen their collaboration, Canada comes in the front of those, and even one particularly discussing large-scale projects, and it was in the sense that there's a lot of large-scale projects as a preferred business partner, and it was in the sense that there was a lot of Inuit kinship amongst Canada and Greenland, and so I think we have a lot of foundation to build from, and so I think this conversation will help advance that. So I'll let them take it off from here. And
wonderful. So I think we'll begin with some brief introductions, and so we'll start with you, Simeon. Originally from Toronto, Simeon McKay is the Counsellor for Political and Public Affairs at the Embassy of Canada to the Kingdom of Denmark. Based in Copenhagen, he began his posting in 2017 and is responsible for general relations between Canada and Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands. From 2011 to 2014, Simeon was posted in Lima as First Secretary at the Embassy of Canada to Peru and Bolivia. He joined the Canadian International Development Agency, former CIDA, in 2006, and has held positions in CIDA and Global Affairs Headquarters working on bilateral issues in the Americas and Europe, and in support of the amalgamation of CIDA into the former Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. He is a graduate of the University of Toronto, Trinity College, and McGill University, where he has received degrees in international relations and political science. Simeon, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes, and I will introduce Inuuteq Holm Olsen. He's a minister, plenipotentiary, and head of representation of the Greenlandic representation at the Danish Embassy in Washington, D.C. since 2014. He's also accredited to Canada. Greenland opened its representation in the North American continent in 2014. Ms. Olsen has been a speaker and a panelist at numerous international conferences, universities, and think tanks in Europe, US, and Canada on issues pertaining to Greenland and Arctic issues, as well as a contributing author to several books. He has also been involved in negotiations and drafting of the chapter on foreign affairs in the Danish Greenlandic Commission on Self-Government of 2008. He has also served as a member of the Danish Defense Commission of 2008, representing the government of Greenland. Prior to coming to DC, he has served as the Deputy Minister of the Department of Foreign Affairs of the government of Greenland from 2004 to 2012. He began his career at the Department of Foreign Affairs in 1996 and was private secretary to the Premier from 1997 to 1999. He has been posted at the Danish Foreign Ministry in Copenhagen and was at the Greenland representation in Brussels from 2000 through 2003. He thereafter returned to Nuuk to be head of Department of Foreign Affairs from 2003 to 2004. Mr. Olsen earned a BA in Political Science from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and has a MA in International Affairs from the George Washington University in 1996. Welcome to the discussion.
So we'll begin with your first question to you, Simeon. How would you characterize the level of diplomatic cooperation between Canada and Greenland historically up until now?
Great. Before I jump in, though, just to say thank you to Arctic 360 for hosting this podcast. And I also had noted that the survey and that Canada was at the top or close to the top in terms of countries that Greenlanders want to see more cooperation with. And I think this podcast series and the work that you're doing at Arctic 360 is going to help contribute to that very much. So congratulations on running this, and thanks for the invitation. To get to your question, historically, I think relations with Greenland have been good. They've been neighborly, and I would say that they're also evolving. But in a consistent way. It's important for us as Canadians to remember that Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, which is a unique constitutional construct that stretches across the North Atlantic from Europe, with Denmark on one side, the Faroe Islands, and then Greenland. So when we talk about relations with Greenland, we're also talking about relations with the Kingdom of Denmark. And throughout the podcast, I'll use the two interchangeably here. And I think it's important for Canadians to understand that, because on the one hand, we come from our federal state, but the Kingdom of Denmark is truly a unique state that we need to better understand. We work and have worked quite well bilaterally with the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland, over the years. I would say perhaps over the last few decades, a lot of focus has been in multilateral fora where we manage shared natural resources, for example, joint fish stocks or marine mammals. The Arctic Council is the premier fora for our cooperation, and we work quite closely with the Kingdom of Denmark and Greenland, particularly on sustainable development issues in the Arctic. But as things have developed historically, I guess you could say the bilateral relationship, I think, is growing. There's perhaps more in a formal way, but we know that historically the ties between the Inuit who live in present-day Canada and Greenland stretch back centuries. And so I wouldn't want to come and say that, oh, the things are getting new or changing, because really we're building on historic ties there. So it's deeply rooted in people-to-people ties. And I think if we look ahead to the future, we're also going to see that it's the people-to-people ties that are going to drive that relationship.
Thank you, Simeon. The next question is for Inuuteq. In 2014, Greenland opened up a diplomatic office in Washington, D.C. to serve diplomatic relations with the U.S. and Canada. Has it, and if so, how has the post served in strengthening Greenlandic-Canadian ties?
Well, first of all, also thank you to Arctic 360 and to Jessica for this initiative. I think it's great, to be given the opportunity to share, our views, as well as knowledge sharing in regard to Greenland Canada relations. But going back to your question, I mean, I think it's important, as Simeon pointed out, to remember that, you know, Canada-Greenland relations are long-standing, you know, going way before 2014, you know, because we share a lot of the both ecology, but also natural resources when it comes to fisheries and in, you know, marine mammals and as such. So, and we have also long-standing relations with Nunavut, for example, that we cherish very much, and because we share many similarities. But as you said, you know, we open up a representation here, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. So to my best of my abilities, you know, we are working on to improve the relations between Canada and Greenland in a number of ways. You know, I think we want to, moving forward, especially with this new government that we have, which is, I mean, they're very much focused on improving trade relations, for example. So that's one of the issues I think we can see a much more focus of in moving forward. But also on, I mean, as Simeon said, you know, we have family relations, you know, between Greenland and Canada that goes back a long way, that we want to maintain, move in the future, and make it easier, possibly to for them to, you know, exchange with each other. So, and we also have some delineation, you know, issues between Greenland and Canada that also are being addressed, you know, as we speak. So. So there's a number of, you know, different issues being neighbors, you know, that we have been, you know, engaged with, but will continue to be engaged with, you know, moving forward.
Thank you. The next question is, how often do you engage with Ottawa, and who in Ottawa do you communicate with?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, you know, we are in close contact with the Danish Embassy in Ottawa, because we share a lot of the information with them. But when it comes to, you know, different federal authorities, it's first and foremost, I mean, the global affairs, I mean, the foreign ministry in Ottawa, but also depending on, you know, which issues, if it is fisheries, you know, then it's with the fisheries authorities and so on. But I mean, but with this pandemic, you know, my last travel was in, you know, to Canada was in, I think, March of last year, you know, to PDAC, the big mining conference in Toronto. So I feel like, you know, it's like, you know, we have to learn to bike, you know, once again, because we've been cut off, you know, physically. And diplomacy is very much about, you know, creating personal relations and engaging with, you know, with your counterparts in different parts. So so we have to, you know, start up again, I think, hopefully very soon.
Thank you. Do you have a relationship with any of the territorial governments or indigenous organizations in the north?
Yes, as I said, you know, we have long-standing contacts and relations with Nunavut. So, and even here in the last couple of weeks, you know, we've been engaging in, you know, talks. I mean, the good thing about this is that we can do this through the web, you know, with like this webinar. So it's possible to maintain contacts, you know, with the territorial government in Nunavut and, you know, different actors there.
Do you find it difficult to engage with Canada when there is so much going on in the US, specifically in DC, and particularly between US and Greenland?
I mean, yeah, I mean, if I could split myself, you know, I would be here in Ottawa. So, but you're correct. I mean, there's a lot of going on in the US, and always, I think, will be. But I think to our best of our abilities, we also maintain regular contacts and try to stay in touch of the developments that are going on, you know, in Canada, and as well as to, you know, nourish and maintain our relations with the different authorities in Canada.
Thank you.
So then Simeon, basically the same question to you. How often does your work take you to Greenland, or how often do you work on Greenlandic issues and so forth?
Yeah, so putting COVID-19 in a parentheses, quite a bit actually. I'm accredited to not only Denmark but also Greenland and the Faroe Islands. So we take that part of our work quite seriously. Here in the political section, Arctic issues, which are almost always somehow touching on Greenland, are a regular part of our work here. And it's not just in my section, I would say also in the commercial section and in the consular section too. So the Arctic, Greenland, and the larger Kingdom of Denmark, even though we're based here in Copenhagen, takes up quite a bit of our time. Maybe just a couple quick anecdotes or examples of that. Prior to the pandemic, I was up regularly, whether it's to assist in the signing of an international treaty, the Central Arctic Ocean Fisheries Agreement, that was signed in Ilulissat, and we represented Canada here from the embassy. We've had Canadian Navy ships coming alongside in Nuuk on their way up to and back from Operation Nanook. We've also had Canadian artists or artists from Canada coming over and participating in Arctic culture festivals. So those are the types of things that we're constantly working on, trying to engage with Greenlanders, and then using those opportunities to also expand our networks into Greenland to foster those good relations. And I would say some of it's paying off. Just last month, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs met with the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs and his Greenlandic counterpart, the new Minister of Foreign Affairs from Greenland, for a fairly concrete and yet wide-ranging discussion on Arctic issues. So those conversations are also happening at a pretty high level, and it's the result of lots of work out of our embassy, but also our colleagues in Ottawa and Inuuteq as well. And maybe on that note, last anecdote is we were actually able to host the Greenlandic Foreign Minister here at our embassy just a few weeks ago, and Inuuteq was there, and so I had a pleasure of meeting him at that time for the first time, despite our paths or messages and emails crossing over the years.
Well, I'm glad then that this discussion was able to bring you back together. As you know, Simeon, the US and Iceland have formal diplomatic posts in Greenland, and I know Russia is interested in opening a consulate, among other countries showing interest. Do you think it would be helpful for your work if Canada opened a formal post in Greenland? And do you think that could be a mechanism for strengthening cooperation?
It's true that Canada doesn't have a consulate in Nuuk, but if you look at the map, no country is closer to Greenland than Canada. And I think that plays to a natural advantage that we have, which again, you'll hear me say this many times, it's those people-to-people ties. And it's that what drives the relationship. Our job here at the embassy is to help connect people and build those ties up. But a lot of them, again, stretch back, not just economically, but also socially through family ties over a long period of time. So in that sense, we do a lot of that work from here. It's also good to note that in a way, one of the goals of the government of Canada that we're working closely with Greenland on is to remove some of that sort of bureaucracy and institutional frameworks that have been put in place over time that are actually inhibiting some of those people-to-people ties in the Arctic. And Inuuteq alluded to it. It's the idea of mobility, so that people can continue or begin again more free movement between Canada and Greenland. And that's something that we've committed to working on together with Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. And maybe another great example, though, is the announcement in December 2020 between the Inuit-owned Canadian North, which is an airline serving a large part of Canada's Arctic, and Air Greenland to establish shared routes between Greenland and Canada, both into Nunavut, but also further south into Ontario. they didn't need a consulate or a Government of Canada assistance to do that. And they were very clear that this was to foster economic and cultural ties. And they're doing that themselves. So that's maybe a long and winding way to say, no, we don't have a consulate, but we also have these unique ties that I think bode well for our future relationship.
And can I just jump in and point out a few things? I mean, with regard to Russia, they have an honorary consulate. So does actually Canada and a number of other countries in Inuuteq, and these are, usually people involved in, businesses who represent, for example, the Canadians, for example, should they need any form of assistance. But Canada actually had a consulate in Inuuteq during World War II, together with the US. So the US just reopened theirs, I think. So.
Maybe just, it's true, I guess I failed to mention our long-serving honorary consul in Inuuteq, Lars Peter Danielson, who has been there for quite some time. But again, it's I would say, based on a really interesting connection in his time as Director of Maintenance for Air Greenland, where Air Greenland was flying and continues to fly Canadian-produced Dash 8 aircraft. So there was, again, that kind of economic tie based on similarities between the needs and requirements of a business operating in Greenland that also coincided with Canadian businesses and experience as well.
Excellent. Now, moving on to the topic of security. So embedded in the narratives and news stories about the Arctic are these discussions about security and changing frames of geopolitics up in the region. To you both, just two questions. Do you think that the general tone on Arctic security is hyperbolic, or does it capture the situation accurately? And then do you see security issues being a source of motivation for strengthening this cooperation that we're talking about between Greenland and Canada? Inuuteq, perhaps we'll start with you.
We can talk about different forms of security here. I don't know if some of them are hyperbolic or not, but I've seen, and been part of this the discussions on Arctic security for a number of years, and I remember clearly, when Russia planted its flag, the press, the media was all over and asking, who owns the Arctic? There's an Arctic race, and that led to actually, the 5 coastal states of the Arctic Ocean to meet in Ilulissat and to adopt the Ilulissat Declaration, saying that, any unresolved or difficult issues will be resolved diplomatically, and through peaceful means. So I think all of the Arctic nations are focused on maintaining, the region as a zone of peace and cooperation, and that's what we want to. We keep on focusing on as well. We are aware that there are, security issues when it comes to, for example, the Russian military build-up and Chinese economic interest. But I think these different forms of security are being addressed. But but there's also other forms of security that are, I think, prominent. Environmental security, food security, and you could go on and on. But I think it's important to be aware, of the different forms of security that are, that have to be addressed in the Arctic. But before COVID, we were. The Arctic was fast becoming part of the globalized, economy and globalized world, and I think the globalization also. There are a number of issues that we have to deal with moving forward. I think, with migration, for example, migration patterns that illegal immigrants even, that have to be aware of. As I'm sure we're going to get back to this form of globalization in a number, very soon. So I think, greater contacts and dialogue between, Canada and Greenland is also merited there, for example.
And now on to you, Simeon, for the same type of question.
Sure. Well, a nice segue. In 2019, Canada released its Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, which was an important moment, I would say, in our overall approach to the Arctic. It was co-developed with our with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners. Excuse me. Let me take a drink here. If that comes back, you'll have to excuse me. So where was I? We launched the Arctic and Northern Policy Framework September 2019, co-developed with provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners, as well as departments across the Government of Canada. That policy framework has a chapter on, let me get it right, safety, security, and defense. So there, I think you see the spectrum of security issues that I think you're alluding to, Elliott. The chapter doesn't shy away from, climate change altering the physical nature of the region, the increased geostrategic interest in the region, but it also goes into issues such as, maritime traffic, food security, etc. So from the Canadian perspective, it tries to cover that broad spectrum. And then also in that policy, we're pretty clear about wanting to keep the Arctic a place of international cooperation. And in that, in there we pointedly say, of course, the Arctic Council is the premier forum for that cooperation, but we're also looking to improve or increase our bilateral cooperation with key North American Arctic partners. And so that's the USA and Alaska and the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland. So yes, that's a long way to say those issues, I think from the Canadian perspective, are well covered from our side, and also offer opportunities for increased collaboration with Greenland.
Perfect. Thank you for addressing that. It does seem like there's new news stories coming out of the Arctic every few weeks in terms of navies and military exercises. But I would agree that in terms of the common discourse, what you might see in the Globe and Mail or in the news is mention of human security issues such as housing and food security. So thank you for addressing that, and we'll come back to that later. I think now Ayoe will ask you questions about mineral resources in the Arctic, which is another very interesting topic.
This question is for both of you. We can start with Inuuteq. The question is, both Canada and Greenland have an abundance of mineral resources. Both see the mining industry as critical for economic growth, and both are trying to figure out the right balance between mining and protecting the environment. Do you think there is a real opportunity for greater cooperation in this area?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in the mining and mineral resources area, there's already, I think, close cooperation between Canada and Greenland, and not necessarily, limited to governments, but to businesses, from business to business perspective. Because if you look at the number of exploration licenses in Greenland, I mean, Canada and Australia, I mean, those are the two biggest nations that are present in Greenland. So, and as I mentioned, PDAC is an annual mineral resources event in Toronto that takes place, and Greenland sends like a delegation of close to 100 people, each year. this year, being an exception, but both consist of, from the political establishment, from the government and parliament, as well as a number of businesses, that that are engaged in the mining business in different ways, logistics and service industries, as well as kind of a hardcore mineral resources companies. So I think there, and I mean, Canada is an kind of a global power when it comes to mineral resources, and the companies being present in Toronto. So, and we very much in touch with those different companies also from an investment perspective.
Yeah, if I can just,
the same question goes for you, Simeon.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I think I can just build on that. I wouldn't underplay the importance that PDAC has as a drawing point for Canada, and I think we can see that the Greenlanders take that conference quite seriously. They invest a lot, and I think that's a really good starting point for having these conversations, and a great place for businesses, but also governments to get to know each other better and work more closely. And I think both Canada and Greenland recognize that responsibility and sustainability are at the heart of a competitive mining industry. In a way, I don't know, perhaps our jurisdictions may be trying to compete in terms of attracting that responsible investment. But I think that's something that also brings us together, is that shared belief in wanting to have responsibility and sustainability in our mining sector.
Thank you. This question is still for both of you. Is there an opportunity to see a regional angle in terms of marketing the region as a global gold standard for sustainable mining? We can start with you, Simeon.
Yes, I have to say that before this, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I suppose so. Maybe let me draw attention to the work of the Canadian Mining Association. They've put together a really interesting, I guess, process and toolkit called the Towards Sustainable Mining Toolkit. And Inuuteq, we actually talked about that briefly when your minister was here. And that's working or helping local communities, environmental actors work directly with mining companies at specific mining sites, so that those operations are contributing to the sustainable development of the local population and meeting those ESG standards, if you will. That's something that the Canadian Mining Association has introduced for its members. We've also seen it being adopted in Finland and in Norway. So that's, I guess you can talk about that larger Arctic area. And so possibly that's a toolkit that could be of interest to operators in Greenland as well, and eventually reach that, I guess, global standard, if you will. But ideally based on some learning from the Canadian Mining Association and its partners.
Thank you. Same question goes for you, Inuuteq.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with what Simeon said, but also point out, we are different jurisdictions with different processes. The Canadian Arctic, you have land rights and different agreements with the different territorial governments and as well as indigenous peoples, as opposed to Greenland, where it's we've taken over the responsibility from Denmark in 2008. So we have full jurisdiction of that. So I think keeping in mind that there are different processes, but I think we have also learned from the Canadian experiences about public hearing processes and such, and the different standards that Simeon mentioned. But it's important, I think, to to keep in mind the sustainability issue in this context, because we all want sustainable development. But at the same time, it is a balance between mining and protecting the environment that is at the core here as well. And how you do that, it continues to evolve. I think the standards continue to develop and evolve, and thankfully to usually a greater standards moving forward. So so I think that's something that we can share, and we do share. I think, for example, at the PDAC events where we have different presenters from Canada, for example, talk about what the evolving standards for doing business in the Arctic are. So
I'm just going to jump in one sec. Maybe question for both of you, and I'm just to dig down a little bit deeper in terms of this, this regional play. It was interesting that there was a comment made about, sometimes there's maybe a bit of a competition in terms of trying to develop resources. I think the bigger backdrop about around all of this, though, is critical minerals, and both Northern Canada and Greenland have a lot of critical minerals, and we know that China has pretty much a monopoly right now in the critical mineral industry, and the United States and Canada have recently signed this critical mineral agreement. And so I'm just wondering if there's something more that possibly could be built off of, and to maybe possibly strengthen this North American Arctic kind of perspective on this being a region for having critical minerals, but critical mineral development, but at the same time also in the context of having very high environmental standards, very high labor standards, and these type of things. And then also, though, a little bit into the regulatory piece, we had the mining project here on the east of Nunavut, very close to Greenland, and that mining project actually has direct implications for Greenland. And so now there's a conversation going between Greenland and Canada about its socioeconomic impact assessment and the role that Greenland plays. And so maybe is there a way to kind of make that more seamless, possibly?
Inuuteq, go first, or?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a very good point you make, because when it comes to critical minerals, as everyone, I'm sure is aware of, is that China dominates that market, and we've been saying, because the U.S. is very much aware, of the need to be able to have, for example, processes and being able to have its supply chains, secured for these critical minerals. And I think it ties together well, both the Greenland, Canada, US, as well as Australia and other like-minded countries, and I think an increased focus on the ability to be able to both mine but also process these critical minerals independently of China. So so in that regard, we've been saying, because we want to develop different projects, mining projects in Greenland, and it's usually a first come first serve. So if you want to partake in and be part of this development, I think you just can't sit idle and wait for somebody to act. So we've been saying and we are actually working. We signed an agreement with the US last October that also covers cooperation in different in the mineral resources area. So the US is engaged, for example, in that scene. But I think you're absolutely right, in that in this when it comes to critical minerals, I think you can see picture emerging where we are working together in a number of ways, in different ways.
Sure, maybe if I can just take the two questions separately. So one on critical minerals, just, I mean, you noted the recent agreement between Canada and the US, which just underscores Canada's position, I guess, as a, how do you want to call it, a trusted partner when it comes to securing those supply chains of critical minerals. And Canadian companies are well positioned to support the sustainable development of those critical minerals overall, and in Greenland as well. So I think, yeah, as Inuuteq says, there are some interesting possibilities, I think, for greater collaboration between Canada and Greenland in that area. On the Mary River iron ore mine, we're both parties to it's called the Espoo Convention, which imposes certain obligations on both sides. Greenland is involved in the environmental impact assessment process. And so those, my understanding is that they're undertaking public consultations right now, and that will impact how the mine is developed. So I don't know in terms of, you know, a more seamless approach. There is an international convention on it. Canada's following that convention. But who knows, maybe smart people at Arctic 360 will propose new ways of doing that. But I think at this point, it seems to be following the process that it's supposed to follow.
Thank you. Jessica, do you have further to put in? Cool, because this is a perfect lead up to the next question. This question is for both of you. We can start with Simeon. Do you see there being an opportunity for greater cooperation in addressing environmental concerns, creating maybe a joint standards for Greenland and Canada?
Sorry, and this is the critical infrastructure bit?
Oh, no.
Sorry, I just it jumped, the connection jumped. I missed about 10 seconds of your question.
Cool, I will just read it up again. This is in terms of mineral resources.
Okay.
Do you see there being an opportunity for greater cooperation in addressing environmental concerns, creating joint standards, maybe for Greenland and Canada?
Yeah, I would go back to the Towards Sustainable Mining toolkit as a first step. That's what I'm most familiar with at this point. Maybe there are other ways of doing it at an international level that I'm just not aware of. But the first thing that comes to mind is the Towards Sustainable Mining toolkit.
Thank you. What do you think, Inuuteq?
Well, I think, you know, as we mentioned earlier, I think we're already feeding off each other in terms of, you know, the inputs and knowledge sharing, for example, at the PDAC events each year about, you know, addressing, you know, the standards and when it comes to, you know, doing mining in a more environmental, sustainable way. So, but as I already, I think I said earlier as well, you know, we each have our own laws and processes, you know, that we also have to respect, you know, so, but there's nothing to hinder us from, you know, engaging with each other and sharing, you know, knowledge about the best standards as well as a number of other issues, you know, so we can do that regardless of the.
Now,
thank you. And now to my co-host Elliott.
Yes, to move on to the issue of critical infrastructure. So we mentioned at the beginning of our conversation the people ties and the cultural ties shared between the Canadian North and Greenland. Unfortunately, however, another thing that is shared between the two is that they both have significant gaps in critical gaps in infrastructure that perhaps lead to those issues of food security and housing security that we mentioned earlier. Considering the fact that this is a shared issue, do you see there being an opportunity for diplomatic cooperation playing a role in helping fill fill that critical infrastructure gap? Perhaps we'll start with you, Simeon.
Yeah, again, that was an interesting question for us to ponder and think about. And I guess where I landed on that was, if you take that North American Arctic concept there, well, the challenges are very similar. And of course, the top challenge facing the region is climate change, and how that's going to impact the lives and well-being of the people who live there. And that can be, you know, whether it's food security, transportation, access to essential goods, etc. So bear with me, but if you go back to the Government of Canada's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, they talk about that. They identify, or the government identifies, key areas that it wants to prioritize investment: energy, transportation, and communications infrastructure. The idea being there that those are areas that are going to have, with that investment, will have spill-off effect into the larger economy to the benefit of people who live there. And to the extent that you know, Greenland shares those concerns, I think there's absolutely a way for us to do a bit more exploration. At the same time, I'll go back to that announcement by Canadian North and Air Greenland as something not spontaneous, but it's, you know, it came from the community, or the community itself, the businesses that are up there. And so, yes, diplomatically, we can probably do more to explore some of those shared challenges. At the same time, we can see that businesses and people living up there are identifying themselves and using the market to solve some of those problems as well.
Yeah, just to, I think, continue what Simeon said about, for example, the contacts between Canadian North and Air Greenland, for example. You know, we are in the process of building new airports, and which, I mean, will open up, I think, for more direct routes, hopefully also from North America, and especially Canada, I think, because I mean, these, you know, transportation routes have been in place before. You know, it's kind of, you know, some years they're there, other years, you know, they're not. You know, they stop and then they commence again. You know, but so I think one of the keys is to establish a business case for maintaining, I think, continued, you know, transportation routes. But one of the things that, you know, we've been focused on is to how do we create more East-West relations. You know, this is what we're talking about right now. You know, but because traditionally, historically, you know, it's been very much North-South in everything. You know, being shipping, transportation. I mean, you name it. So I think we want to try to how can we break those kind of patterns, historic patterns, and I think you have to. We are beginning to see it, you know, slowly. I think evolving. I can only speak, you know, for Greenland, you know, with for example the shipping routes, cooperation with an Icelandic shipping company that now we are connected, you know, with Canada as well as the U.S. as opposed to, you know, Denmark for centuries. You know, that was the only way, you know, back and forth. So and you know, with the, I think we can feed off each other's maybe infrastructures. You know, I would say, why not look at, you know, if, for example, the deep water harbor in Nuuk can be a supply, you know, for Nunavut, for example, or Inuit, you know, and I know there's a project that's also looking at if it is feasible to, for example, can take this optic sea cable from Nuuk, you know, to the other side because it's already there, you know. So I think there's a number of ways that we should think, I think, creatively moving forward in how to, I think, best utilize the infrastructure that we have up there, because as you know, that it is, you know, lagging in some ways, but there are, I think solutions that can be explored if they are feasible and possible.
So then, just as a follow-up, then what would, for example, diplomacy as a whole, its role in, for example, trying to attract private capital to some of those bigger projects, those key infrastructure projects, and in general, marketing the North American Arctic as a very attractive and, lucrative place to do business?
Right. Sorry. So what's the question, that North American Arctic as a concept to attract investment?
Sure. So, one of the biggest things that businesses consider when they're looking to make an investment is minimizing risk. So how can the diplomatic process between Canada and Greenland and Denmark, how can that act to position the Arctic as a less risky environment to do business than it might be seen as by the business community today?
Sure. So I think, one of the little, it's kind of a little project, but maybe we can use that to expand it. One of the projects that Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark supported in the Arctic Council was with the Gwich'in Council International, that looked at how can we help, or how can remote communities in the Arctic make the transfer from fossil fuels onto clean energy, right? And so you've got incredible, that's terrible for the environment, but also incredible opportunities there in terms of clean technology and the green transition. Well, together in a diplomatic process through the Sustainable Development Working Group in the Arctic Council, we funded that project. And now there's a toolkit online. I keep saying toolkit, but this is yet another smaller process that can help those communities find out what works for them to become self-reliant in their energy needs. So that would be one small example. And I think Canada is certainly recognizing that. And I know my understanding is Greenland also puts quite a bit of emphasis on the work of the Sustainable Development Working Group. And then to that end, Minister Garneau, Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs, just announced last month that Canada will host a new secretariat for the Sustainable Development Working Groups. That's going to be at the University of Laval in Quebec City. So we're investing diplomatic resources, if you will, into trying to find more of those kinds of solutions that can help communities move, take those steps that will make them more autonomous, self-reliant, but are also really interesting opportunities for the economy and for infrastructure, in that case, the toolkit there, the clean technology.
Perfect. Now, in the few minutes that we have left, I just have one more question, and then I believe we have one more from Ayoe. So on the whole, if we were to just wrap up our conversation with a bow, what do you see as being some of the driving forces that can best strengthen this relationship between Canada and Greenland, and who would need to take the first step in bringing this relationship even closer? Would it be government, business, or both? And do any specific sectors or issues stand out that might block that or impede that process?
Do you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. No. We are neighbors, so it's only logical for neighbors to have a lot of relations with each other and a lot of cooperation. As I said, at the beginning, there's already continued discussions and on a number of issues that have been ongoing for years and will continue to be so. And I think as the Arctic becomes increasingly part of this globalized economy, I see it as one of the driving forces for the need, to strengthen the relationships, but also just to make it easier for us in Greenland as well as in Canada to be able to travel to each other's countries, as well as I mentioned also trade. I think that's one of the issues also that we'll be very much focused on. But I think as diplomats and governments, we have to be aware that, you know, our role is to set up frameworks, the right frameworks for, you know, the other actors, you know, the business community as well as other actors to use. So being aware of that, you know, who takes the first step is, yeah, it's always in some ways a question of the chicken and the egg. But I mean, we'd be happy to take on the lead. I think as a government, but I mean, business. We already alluded to it. You know, businesses always also plays an important role. You know, being airlines or the mining, you know, industry to connect with each other, and that will also, you know, continue regardless of, you know, what governments can agree to or not. So. Do you see any specific sectors or issues? I mean, you know, I think, you know, for Greenland especially, you know, fisheries is our biggest sector and will continue to be so. And, you know, we, I think, continue to have close collaboration with Canadian authorities on that as well. But as I said, I think also other issues will, I think, continue to emerge in the future when it comes to, you know, the effects of a more globalized economy. That I mean, climate change, you know, brings its effects, you know, on, for example, sea routes, you know, the opening up of the oceans. Also brings its own challenges. So I think I already see, you know, an issue there, or a sector that where we have to, I think, talk to each other much more closely moving forward.
Yeah. Maybe to just build on that, I think your question makes it too easy. Government, business, or both? Both, obviously. So thanks. But I think from the government side, of course, yeah. Do you lead or follow? Or I think what I have learned in my time here is you have to follow the interests. So I can have the most amazing ideas from my little office in Copenhagen, but if that's not what's interesting to the people who are living there in the Arctic, then, you know, no point. And maybe that seems so obvious, but it's true. Maybe a couple, three crunchy areas as well that I can offer up from my side, building on Inuuteq's comment that governments set frameworks. So one is, again, Inuuteq alluded to this, we have some boundary disputes. In 2018, we announced Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark, so both the Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers, along with the Canadian foreign minister, announced a joint task force to resolve those remaining bilateral boundary issues, the infamous Hans Island. My understanding is that that task force is close to having things resolved. So how can we take, I mean, that's going to be hopefully a good news story. How can we build on that? What will we have learned? And, you know, when we don't have jokes to make anymore about trading snaps and whiskey on an island, what are we going to talk about next? And how can we leverage that into the next opportunity? The second one has been alluded to, which is the mobility of peoples between Greenland and Canada. An announcement was made by governments to resolve that issue. So that work is ongoing, and Canada is keen to work with the new government in Greenland on this. But we also know that the exchange of people leads to the exchange of ideas. So how do we use that mobility to take things to the next level? And similar to that and related is the proposal by the Inuit Circumpolar Commission related to the North Water Polynia, and excuse me if I say it incorrectly, but the Pikiala Sorsuak, which is an open body of water between Greenland and Canada. It stays open all year round and has been a source of sustenance for the peoples living up there for a really long time. There are new ideas of like, how do we co-manage that resource to the benefit of the people who live there. Again, those are new ideas. How do we take that and use it to build up a bigger bilateral relationship, those exchanges of people and ideas? So those are three issues that are on the go, I would say, to one extent or another. And I think hopefully we can leverage those to build the relationship out further over the next 10 years. And maybe I'll just, last point, remind your listeners that, again, in Canada's Arctic and Northern Policy Framework, we say that we want an enhanced bilateral relationship with the Kingdom of Denmark, Greenland. And I think those three examples I just mentioned are part and parcel of advancing that relationship.
Thank you. Just addressed my last question, and that's wonderful. But I would like to ask the same question for Inuuteq, and it's the very last question. Where do you see the Canada-Greenland relationship over a 10-year horizon in terms of trade, economic, and business, in terms of trade, economic, and business cooperation, regional political cooperation?
If I am to follow up on what Simeon said, it will be a flourishing, I think, a bilateral relationship that we'll have in a 10-year horizon, because to leverage all these, the resolving of the different issues that we are engaged in. But I'm optimistic about the future Greenland, Greenland and Canada relationship moving forward, because I think we do realize that it makes sense, to cooperate, because the North American Arctic has its own unique characteristics. So I think it's we way better off, instead of doing it alone, if we are able to, I think, work together, both businesses as well as governments. And to make it easier, as was said, to be able to travel, I think, more freely between each other.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, that wraps up the question component. I'll just turn it over to Jessica for some final words.
Sure. Thank you all for this. This has been a really fascinating conversation. I think I'll just, maybe to wrap it all up, pick up on one thing that Inuuteq said, which is I think is extremely, it couldn't be truer. And whether it's diplomatic, whether it's trade, business, at the heart of all of this, things are built on personal, strong relationships, and those take a long time to develop. And but they are the foundation of what everything else is built upon. And so I hope that through this new relationship we have with our Greenlandic students, because at where does that all start? And it starts with the young people, and it starts with people-to-people collaboration. And they're the ones with the best ideas and new ideas, because they have their finger on the radar for what's of growing concern for the decades to come, because they're living it and they are the future. And so I feel really fortunate and excited that I've had Ayoe and Elliott to be able to host this conversation today between you two, Simeon and Inuuteq. And so I hope this is just the beginning of many more good conversations to come and new ideas to flourish. So thank you all.
No, thank you. And my applause also, to involving the Greenlandic, students, because we need to see, I think, much more of that. And I look forward to continued discussions on this issue between the evolving relationship between Canada and Greenland. So I look forward to the next one. You'll be there. We'll invite you. Thank you.
And just from my side, couldn't agree more. And what a unique opportunity to bring students from both sides together, and also to just going through the questions to learn the perspectives that and kind of see it pulling from both sides. So it was really, really a pleasure to be here, and I wish Arctic 360 all the best.
Thank you.